Hey everyone, and welcome to the 9:30 at 9:30 Central Time Q&A. This was an idea. I went to a business conference. Get it arranged here. Went to a business conference a couple of weeks ago, and the people leading it suggested that I do one of these, and so I thought, perfect. I hadn't done a live Q&A in September, and I was looking for a good day, so 9:30 seemed like a fine day. So it's 10:30 Eastern, 8:30 Mountain, and 7:30 Pacific. I'm sorry if it's a little early for those of you on the West Coast. I also know that people are members of Church Tech U from all over the world. So whether you're in Canada or England or Australia, your time is going to be a little bit different. It's probably really good for those of you that are in England, for example. I think UTC is 4 hours ahead, so that makes this, early afternoon for you. So probably a great time for you. So I wanted to tell you a little behind the scenes of what I'm doing. The shot is a little closer than I'd like. I didn't get a chance to tweak it any more than it is. And that's because I'm using the Switcher Studio app. As you may or may not know, I just wrote an ebook for them, and they kindly gave me access to their app so that I could see some of the behind the scenes stuff. So that's what's going on there. And I finished my breakfast right before I started. So it could be, we're going to have a fun time here. By the way, if you are watching right now, I would love it if you would reload the page if you don't already see the comments, and also reload the page if you don't already see the video. I'm going to check real quick just to make sure that I can hear myself, and then we'll get started. Okay, that looks good, and the shot actually looks pretty good given that I'm sending this portrait because of the way the UI works. I'm going to have to upgrade to a newer iPad if I wanted to continue to use this. So, let's head over to ProPresenter, and I'm going to show you just a couple of little things about transitions. So, speaking of transitions, that was a cross dissolve. Cross dissolve is when you fade between two things in video. So, you should know that ProPresenter has a bunch of transitions, and since it's built on layers, the transitions each do some slightly different things. So, first off, if you're in this view, so you do not have the video image bin hidden, let me show you what that looks like. So if I go to view, video image bin, or Control V, that gets rid of that, and you see these two transitions down here. So if we go back to, I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut this time, Control V, and that's the Mac keyboard shortcut. If I go back there, you'll see that I have the transition right here. So that is the transition between foreground videos, or the transition between background videos. This is the transition between slides. So remember that the slides layer lives above the media layer. Now, if you're showing a foreground video, it replaces whatever is on a slide. So if I were to, so if I were to take this video, it replaces what's on the slide, and then when I click on a slide, this is from the multilingual tutorial that I just did not too long ago, when I replace the, when I click on a slide, it replaces the foreground video. But same video as a background goes underneath. So you probably knew all that. That was just a quick recap. Let me pause this. So transition down here at the bottom is the transition that changes things on the media layer. So whether it's between a background and a foreground, foreground and a background, a foreground and a foreground, or a background and a background, that's what this transition does. This transition is the transition between slides. So let's change this to something obvious and kind of annoying that I would never use. In general, I would probably use cut, dissolve, and occasionally, in a rare instance, fade to black. But I want this very obvious, just for teaching purposes. So we're going to click that and change that to swap. And I'm going to do the same down here and change that to ripple. Okay. So if I click on this background image, you'll see how that is clearly a pretty annoying transition, but that's what that does. If I click on these slides, you'll see that that's what that does. But what if I only wanted to overwrite that on one slide? Well, I can right click here and let's see, where is this? Click on transitions. And then I get the ability to do, let's do a cover here. So when I click on this one, you'll see that that's different from the default transition, which is this. So default transition on the slides layer and transition on just one slide. Likewise, down here, there is also the ability to change the transition. So let's go into this one. I'm going to right click and go to transitions. You can also access it through media properties. And let's do my favorite example of what never ever ever to do, and I'm only going to do it just for this, is the 3D cube spin. So we'll click down here and let me show that to you right now. Yeah. So the default transition is the ripple. Anytime I go to any other one, it's going to be the ripple. But when I go to this, it's not the transition out of this, it's the transition into this. That's what the transition does, is when it goes into something, that's the transition it takes. So going into this text, it does that transition. Coming out of that text, it does the default. Going into it, out of it. So that's just a little bit about transitions, and that's why sometimes you'll have a transition that doesn't make any sense. You said, but I changed it here. Why hasn't it changed when I switch the background? Well, because this is the transition for the slides layer. And what gets really confusing is when you get rid of the video image bin, you have those right here where it's a little less obvious. I will say there was a little controversy on the ProPresenter users group the other day because Carl Barnhill from 1230 Media was suggesting that the transition between slides, cuts are becoming more of the norm. And he very well might be right. The thing is that if you're not paying attention to it, you might not notice a cut. But you will notice something like that. That's really obvious. So that's not really a hill that I die on, but I could see his point there. So in general, and it's worth noting, if you want to get rid of the transition, just click on default back here. So same thing here, transitions, default. So that gets rid of the special transitions that were on just this slide and just this background, and puts it back to the default, which is this across dissolve. So cross dissolving between backgrounds and cutting between slides. So that is just the basics of transitions in ProPresenter 6. Now let me go and answer some questions that I've collected, and then we'll go from there. Okay, give me just a second to get my list of questions. So the first question comes to us from Robert Wiener on YouTube, and he asked, as a new user trying to understand ProPresenter, what do you use templates for? And that's a great question. There's all this different terminology, and it can get a little confusing. So templates are a way to apply font changes, color changes, and to a certain degree background changes, and I'll talk about that here in just a second, to multiple slides in a presentation at once. You could do it just on one if you wanted to, select all, change to a worship background, and then if you have a separate slide for the CCLI, just select that one slide and change its template. That's a perfectly acceptable way to do it. So a template is basically a list of everything that affects the look of the slide on the slides layer. So normally that does not affect the background. But if you put the background on the slides layer, then it will. With that is, if it's a video background, it will change with the slide, and it will restart if you put it on each and every slide, or it will disappear when you click on a different slide. So normally you would not want to put the background on the slides layer, but you'll notice that some of the default templates have a background. Well, turns out ProPresenter and Renewed Vision, they're doing a little trickery, and they're putting an image on the slides layer on every slide. So since the image doesn't move, we don't notice the transition between, but in fact there is a transition. So that's what templates do, is they're able to change multiple properties of slides all at once, doing multiple slides in a song, the entire song. You can even do multiple songs. So that's what templates do. Next question. Oh, I'm going to mess up his last name. Okay, Philip Pirschbacher. That's what I'm going to say, and I'm going to apologize if I said that wrong. Philip asks, am I able to edit while projecting a slide during service? Yes. It depends on how heavy duty you want to get into the editing and how much you need to change the slides while you're editing. So it is not unusual for me to right-click on a slide during service and select Quick Edit and fix a typo. Even during a song, even with 1 or 2 lines per the song. I'm always reading ahead, and if I see that there's a mistake, I fix it. That's fine. The problem comes when you try and do more heavy-duty editing. So I think someone asked, well, could I work on the sermon for the next service while the sermon for our second service is going on? Theoretically, yes, but it depends on how many slides your pastor has. So if the pastor has one at the beginning of the sermon and one at the end of the sermon, absolutely no problem. If the pastor changes slides every few minutes, problem, because you need to go back in there. And if the pastor's using a remote to change it, it's going to affect the UI. So just keep that in mind. If it was the case that the pastor changes slides a lot, what I would do is I'd put ProPresenter on another machine and work there, and then transfer that over by exporting a ProPresenter bundle. So that's how I would do that. Next question comes from Tarita Mackey. Would you say the new MacBook Air is reliable to run ProPresenter? The answer is, I don't know if I would say it, but I know a lot of people in the ProPresenter users group would say that. The new MacBook Air is much more powerful than previous MacBook Airs, which were great for word processing, but not great for much else. So that's it. Next, I got an email from Jerry Wales, and he said, hi Paul, I want to thank you for your excellent training videos. You're welcome. I use them to train my volunteers, and it's a great help to me. You really ought to join Church Tech U, because that's even more geared for that. A quick question. ProPresenter for Windows. I'm trying to send lyrics to my streaming computer running vMix. Do I need to purchase the SDI module in ProPresenter, or do I use NDI Scan Converter? When I demo the modules in ProPresenter, I get the output screen on my streaming computer, but with Scan Converter, all I get is a gray screen. Thanks for your help. So, as it turns out, if you can get Scan Converter, if you can get NDI Scan Converter, which is free software from the people that make the TriCaster and the same people they created NDI. If you download that software, which I've got a tutorial on, you should be able to use that without the NDI module. It's pretty straightforward. You basically just select the image you want to capture, select the screen you want to capture, and that sends it out over the network. That should work, and it should work for free. It will use more system resources, but if you've got an adequate computer, that should work fine. If you can't get that to work, you could absolutely purchase the SDI module and configure that, and it would work fine. In fact, that's going to be the way that Renewed Vision would suggest you do it. And if you want it easy and reliable, that's the way that I would do it. If you have to have it free, I would use NDI scan converter. So, okay, Richard Streeter asked on YouTube, I would like to get the import as native PowerPoint function to work on a Windows 10 machine. I don't know if I don't have the right version of PowerPoint or what, but it still brings up the whole slide with no animations, just as it would do with JPEGs. It mostly works with a couple of quirks in ProPresenter 5, but no luck in ProPresenter 6. Okay, so you do need one of the latest versions. This doesn't matter if you're dealing with doesn't matter with whether you're dealing with the Mac or with Windows. One of the later versions is going to work. I had someone just the other day that was asking about an earlier version of Office, and it just was not working for anything. And that's because it was an earlier version of Office. So make sure you have probably one of the last two versions. When you go to import PowerPoint, it should give you a choice. And one of the choices is importing them as stills. That's a viable thing. And on ProPresenter for Windows, now I haven't looked at ProPresenter for Windows in about a year, so could be this has changed because Microsoft is always tweaking stuff, and when they tweak things, it can affect how ProPresenter brings in the PowerPoint. But about a year ago, it was the case that there were 4 checkboxes, and one of those checkboxes had to bring it in with animations, and it wasn't perfect because PowerPoint animations and ProPresenter animations are different, so there was some guesswork involved, but you could kind of do that. I did talk to someone last week on the ProPresenter users group whose pastor started using like a bulleted list reveal, or whatever they call it in PowerPoint. They make that in ProPresenter, so I would just use the ProPresenter version. Just bring it in as text, and then use that bulleted list reveal. So it depends on what you're doing. Make sure you've got one of the latest versions and go from there. Oh, on the same computer. Just having it somewhere on a computer, not the same. You need one of the latest versions on the same computer that ProPresenter has, because ProPresenter uses it. One quick tip, sometimes opening PowerPoint before you open the PowerPoint import dialog helps, so do that as well. Next question we have, this is from John Brzezinski. Hey Paul, I'm not sure who to contact with the ProPresenter problem. I'm on the volunteer tech team at church, and somehow when Dropbox was created, it moved some of our ProPresenter folders. Bottom line, we lost our database of songs. My partner said he followed a video on how to import ProPresenter 5 songs into ProPresenter 6, and it didn't work. Just wondering if you were able to help out. Okay, this is a common thing. If the location of the folder that holds the songs, and in ProPresenter 4 and following, it's a folder with individual little documents that are actually XML files. If that gets moved, ProPresenter doesn't know where it is. and so it acts like there's nothing there, even though it might still be on your computer's hard drive. So first strategy, make sure you always have a backup. It's computers, backups are good things. 3 backups are really the minimum I'd recommend. 2 of them on different media and 1 of them off-site. So 3, 2, 1. I didn't come up with that, but I heard it and I thought, that's brilliant. Have 3 backups. 2 on different media and 1 off-site. So here's what I do. I have my computer. I have external hard drives. So I have SSD and spinning drives. And then I also have an off-site backup that happens over the network. Which reminds me, I need to turn that on. So one of my hard drives was not, an external hard drive was not turned on, so that should continue its backup that it's always doing in the background. That's my media drive. So that's the first thing. Second thing, assuming you've got backups, you need to look for that folder. So go into here. Let me show you where I would look. Let's go back to ProPresenter and oops. Okay. So we go into ProPresenter Preferences, and in the General tab here, the top part you might not have ever looked at. So the top part here is where stuff is located. Specifically, what we're looking for is not the media repository. If you've lost your backgrounds and foregrounds and stuff, that's where you would look for that. But the library folder. So if you click on this little magnifying glass here, let me switch over to Finder. Okay, so then that brought that up. So if we bring that down, you'll see that I've got all these files in the .pro6 format, and that's where everything is. If I were to move this anywhere else, ProPresenter would lose it. If I were to make a backup of this, I would have it to bring it back in. So just compare where ProPresenter thinks it is with do a little search. Command comma or space will bring up Spotlight search by default on a Mac, and you could do a search for ProPresenter 6 with no space, because that is the name of the file here in the Documents folder. And if we scroll down, we see that we have it right here. And I can just double click on it, and that would bring that up. So if I found that the ProPresenter 6 folder was not where ProPresenter 6 needs it to be, I just move it, restart ProPresenter 6, and it should be there. If I've lost it completely, make sure that I back it up. If for some reason you had this on the desktop here, by default, macOS will back this up to iCloud, and then when hard drive or SSD drive space becomes limited, it will delete local copies, and that freaks ProPresenter out. Maybe Pro 7 won't be like that, but Pro 6 is. So that's the things that I would look for there. Let me go back, see if there are any questions. I'm going to reload this. But if there aren't any questions, then we'll call it a day for this one, and people can come back, watch this later, and I hope it provides some value to you. So until next time, this is Paul Allen Clifford from TrinityDigitalMedia.com and ChurchTechU.com reminding you to go out and change eternity.